Tonight at 10, a significant error of judgment means that Sam Allardyce is no longer the England football manager. He'd been in the job for just 2 months. The FA has terminated his contract with immediate effect. He'd spent the day with officials at Wembley following a newspaper report that he'd offered advice on bypassing the FA's rules on player transfers.
You've done a deal with the agent where you get 5% of the agent's fee, which is massive for doing about 2 hours work.
We've concluded, and Sam's agreed, that his behaviour's been inappropriate and frankly not what is expected of an England manager.
We'll have more on the FA statement, and we'll be asking how damaging this episode could be for the game. Also tonight, head-to-head for the first time, Trump and Clinton's debate is watched by 80 million people in the race for the White House. The owners of Alton Towers are fined £5 million for a needless and avoidable roller coaster crash. The world's first baby has been born using a new technique with DNA from 3 people. And a service at Westminster Abbey to celebrate the life of Sir Terry Wogan on the 50th anniversary of his first BBC radio broadcast.
Here, Winchester Prison's criticised over the death of Hayden Burton, an inmate already on suicide watch, and the Wokingham School for Children with Special Needs that hasn't yet started term.
Good evening. The England football manager Sam Allardyce has lost his job after just 1 match in charge of the national team. Senior figures at the Football Association spent the day in crisis talks to discuss newspaper reports that Mr Allardyce had used his position to negotiate a £400,000 business deal, and that he'd also offered advice on how to bypass the FA's rules on player transfers. The FA said that Mr Allardyce accepted that he'd made a significant error of judgment. Our sports editor Dan Rowan has the latest from Wembley.
Gone in the blink of an eye, Sam Allardyce driven out of Wembley tonight before he even had a chance to manage a game here. This, the sorry end of the shortest and most ill-fated reign of any England boss in history. This evening, the FA confirming that Allardyce had lost his job after an undercover newspaper sting.
Why did Sam Allardyce have to go?
I think the things he said were inconsistent with his post at the senior manager in England. He manages the national side, he represents the country, and is an employee of the ruling body. That's a higher standard of behaviour that's expected. And the things he said on television about other people and about things in football were inappropriate things for a manager to say. He's accepted that and admitted he was foolish.
This is what got Big Sam into such big trouble. Just weeks after his appointment, this secret filming showed the manager meeting businessmen claiming to work for a Far Eastern company. In fact, they were undercover reporters from the Daily Telegraph. The newspaper claimed Allardyce, despite an FA salary of £3 million, cashed in on his position to agree in principle to a £400,000 a year deal to represent the firm.
And the fees will be sensible. I would have thought £100,000 a time.
Set the agenda out of what it would look like. Me flying out on whatever day, landing in Hong Kong or Singapore, staying in this hotel, meeting these people, doing that keynote speech, travelling back either 2 days later or 1 day later.
And then there was this, Allardyce appearing to offer advice on avoiding rules over third-party ownership, where companies or agents control stakes in footballers, outlawed by the governing body to improve integrity in the transfer system.
I mean, the third-party ownership problem,
it's not a problem now.
Yeah.
You still get around it.
But the sting showed Allardyce talking about more than just money. He ridiculed the man he replaced as England manager, Roy Hodgson. Former England assistant coach Gary Neville also comes in for criticism, as does the mentality of the England squad and even the Duke of Cambridge. Allardyce was summoned here to Wembley to explain himself as his bosses held showdown talks.
Did he offer to resign, or did you have to sack him? How did it work?
We didn't sack him. We agreed that his position was untenable and he's left by mutual consent. We didn't get to the point where we had to consider sacking him. We had a very good conversation with him. It wasn't one of those difficult conversations where he denied everything. He came along, recognised the problems it created, took it on his own shoulders, discussed it in a mature fashion, and when we said, well, this is probably not going to work, Sam, he says, I agree. I mean, we need to move on from this, both of us.
In a statement tonight, Allardyce said, "I am deeply disappointed. I offered a sincere and wholehearted apology for my actions. I recognise I made some comments which have caused embarrassment."
You've not seen this one before, have you?
Just 2 months ago, he'd landed the job he'd coveted all his career.
I think I fit the chair. I hope I do.
But he didn't. And after just one match in charge, Allardyce's dream job has turned into a nightmare.
Well, let's go live to Wembley tonight, and Dan Rowan is there. Dan, notwithstanding the relatively swift action today of the Football Association, what are your thoughts on the potential damage to the image of the game?
Well, I think even by England's standards, this truly takes some believing. Surely one of the most remarkable and humiliating episodes in the history of the game. Earlier this evening, the former England captain Alan Shearer said that it left the FA a laughingstock, and quite frankly here it's hard to disagree. I think for many people, they'll look at the amount of money and wealth in the sport and see this as a regrettable reminder of the fact that for many ordinary fans, the game feels somewhat out of touch, where greed is rife. It's awful, of course, for Allardyce himself. It's cost him the job he worked so hard and so long for, but it also reflects very poorly, I think, on his former employers, the FA, who, after all, just a few weeks ago, despite reservations held by many, appointed him. They hailed him as the outstanding choice to replace Roy Hodgson as England manager. His job was to breathe new life into the England team after that humiliating exit to Iceland earlier this summer in Euro 2016. Instead, despite that being rock bottom, we now know it was yet to come. And remarkably, the Allardyce era has lasted just 67 days.
Dan, again, thanks very much. Dan Rowan there, sports editor, with the latest tonight at Wembley. Well, Donald Trump has criticised the way last night's televised debate with Hillary Clinton was conducted. He suggested some of the questions were unfair. He also claimed that his microphone hadn't been working properly. The debate, the first of three before Election Day in November, involved lively exchanges on the economy and on national security, on racism and sexism. It also involved personal attacks, with each candidate questioning the other's suitability for the presidency. Our North America editor John Sopel reports now from New York.
In diplomacy, they call this a grin and grab. In last night's presidential debate, it quickly gave way to grimaces as both candidates exchanged blows. Donald Trump started the brighter, attacking Hillary Clinton for initially backing the Pacific trade deal that he said would cost America jobs.
You called it the gold standard of trade deals. You said it's the finest deal you've ever seen.
No.
And then you heard what I said about it, and all of a sudden you were against it.
Well, Donald, I know you live in your own reality, but that is not the facts.
But then it was Donald Trump's turn to be put under the cosh, first over his refusal to hand over his tax returns, something that all candidates have done for over 40 years.
Or maybe he doesn't want the American people, all of you watching tonight, to know that he's paid nothing in federal taxes, because the only years that anybody's ever seen were a couple of years when he had to turn them over to state authorities when he was trying to get a casino license, and they showed he didn't pay any federal income tax. So
that makes me smart.
But how smart when everyone else has to pay tax? His business acumen is a cornerstone of his appeal. Not releasing those returns only raises more questions. He then came under attack over his attitude towards women, a key demographic in this election where he's trailing badly.
But this is a man who has called women pigs, slobs, and dogs.
She spoke about a beauty pageant contestant whom Mr. Trump had called Miss Housekeeping because she was Latina.
Donald, she has a name.
Where did you find
Her
this?
name
Where
is
did you find
Alicia
this?
Machado.
Where did you find
And
it?
she has become a U.S. citizen, and you can bet she's going to vote this November.
Okay, good. Let me just tell you.
But Donald Trump then sought to make it about character. Who had the stamina to be president?
She doesn't have the look. She doesn't have the stamina. I said she doesn't have the stamina. And I don't believe she does have the stamina. To be president of this country, you need tremendous stamina.
Well, as soon as he travels to 112 countries and negotiates a peace deal, a ceasefire, a release of dissidents and opening of new opportunities in nations around the world, or even spends 11 hours testifying in front of a congressional committee. He can talk to me about stamina.
Hillary has experience, but it's bad experience. We have made so many bad deals during the last... So she's got experience, that I agree, but it's bad experience.
Donald Trump positioning himself as the political outsider resonates with many disillusioned Americans. But at the end of the debate, it was Donald Trump's stamina that seemed to be flagging.
Here in the spin room, both sides are claiming victory, as you'd expect, and Donald Trump has come in to do his own spinning. He had one question to answer in this debate. Did he have the temperament to be the next commander-in-chief, the next president? And on that, maybe the jury is still out. Mr. Trump, are you satisfied with how it went?
There was no response. John Sopel, BBC News, New York.
Hi, how are you?
Well, an estimated 80 million Americans watched last night's debate, which provided the best opportunity so far for both candidates to persuade voters of their case for moving into the White House. Our North America correspondent Nick Bryant has been assessing the reaction of viewers from Seattle on the West Coast to Harlem in New York.
This was a presidential debate that doubled as the ultimate reality TV show. And across this vast continent, millions of viewers made it the most watched political showdown in American history. At watch parties in Seattle, both sides had moments to cheer.
I will release my tax returns against my lawyer's wishes when she releases her 33,000 emails that have been deleted.
Just join the debate by saying more crazy things. Now, let me...
But it was the Clinton supporters who emerged the more jubilant, confident the debate had exposed Donald Trump's flaws and showcased her strengths.
I thought she did awesome. I thought she stuck to her policies. She said the facts that she needed to say. I thought she had a good sense of humor about his overall absurdity and ridiculousness, and I hope that the American voters will go out there and stand by her.
At Harlem's iconic Apollo Theatre last night, an auditorium packed with African-American voters who Donald Trump is trying to woo. But his outreach doesn't seem to be working.
I'm not convinced about anything Donald Trump said. I'm really not convinced at all. Hillary Clinton, yes, I am convinced because she has the experience, she has the character.
Construction sites in Manhattan are where Donald Trump built his fortune, and also the home to some of his strongest blue-collar supporters. But many were disappointed by his performance.
I didn't think he held good enough on substance. I think he could have hit her harder with some more facts.
He didn't shoot back fast enough.
So you're a Donald Trump fan?
I am.
But you thought Hillary Clinton won?
I do.
Donald Trump has complained about the moderator and said he was given a bad microphone that picked up his sniffles. He's also defended calling a former Miss Universe Miss Piggy, saying she gained a massive amount of weight, and that was a real problem.
Did anybody see that debate last night?
Ahead of the debate, the polls were suggesting a photo finish.
Oh, yes.
But Hillary Clinton clearly believes this could be a decisive moment. Nick Bryant, BBC News, New York.
Well, let's go live to New York tonight, and John is there for us. John Sopel, our North America editor. Plenty of lively exchanges, John, as you were telling us. But has this, do you think, done enough to change the terms of the debate?
Well, to this extent, Hugh, it has. If you just look at Hillary Clinton's face, and if a picture tells 1,000 words, that beaming smile of hers at that rally shows that she clearly feels that something has shifted in the race. And when you have Donald Trump, although he claims that he has won the debate, it's clear that he has major problems if he's having to talk about the microphones and the way that the moderator handled it. That said, Donald Trump still has time. He's got to show that he isn't just winging it, which is what it seemed in last night's debate, where Hillary Clinton was prepared to within an inch of her life, you felt. So there are 2 more debates to go. There are 42 days. What Donald Trump really needs to do is to raise his game. Yes, Hillary won, but there was no knockout blow. Hugh.
John, thanks very much again. John Sopel there with the latest on the reaction to that debate in New York. Now, the operator of Alton Towers, Merlin Attractions, has been fined £5 million after admitting health and safety failings which led to a crash on a roller coaster. 16 people were injured, 5 of them seriously, in the accident in June of last year on the Smiler roller coaster. Lawyers say that the families were shocked by some of the evidence that they heard at today's hearing, as Sophie Long tells us.
Vicky Bouch and Leah Washington walked to court today using prosthetic limbs. Both girls had to have a leg amputated after the crash. Today, the company responsible was fined £5 million for breaching health and safety law. It's believed to be a record fine for the industry, but Chanda Chauhan, who was in the second row along with her 2 daughters and is still suffering from the psychological effects, thinks it should have been more.
That £5 million isn't going to change what's happened to us. Myself and my 2 daughters were in an accident, and that's broken our total family structure into pieces, and that's not going to change.
In court, the most seriously injured heard for the first time the catalogue of errors that led to months of pain and rehabilitation. They heard an empty test car had been sent around the track but failed to complete the loop due to high winds and came to a standstill. That the computerised safety system activated and stopped the carriage they were in. But they were told engineers thought this was a mistake. They decided to manually override it and restarted the roller coaster. This is the moment that changed their lives forever. In the middle of the picture is the stationary carriage. Coming from the right, the car full of people. The judge talked of the psychological trauma suffered when they saw the carriage ahead before plunging into it with the force of a car travelling at 90 miles per hour. And then what he called the obvious shambles that followed, which meant they were left, some with life-threatening injuries, 20 feet above ground for up to 5 hours. The victim's lawyer said his young clients had been shocked by what they'd learned.
A catastrophic failure to assess risk, inadequate training, inadequate supervision, inadequate management.
Merlin accepted responsibility for what happened and expected a large fine. But it may be the damage to its reputation that proves more costly long term.
The far bigger punishment for all of us is the knowledge that on this occasion we let people down with such devastating consequences. It is something none of us will ever forget, and it is something we are utterly determined will never be repeated.
Emergency services say detailed risk assessments are now in place for all rides at Alton Towers and at other theme parks across the country. Sophie Long, BBC News, Staffordshire.
A review by the Crown Prosecution Service has upheld a decision not to press charges against Sir Cliff Richard over allegations of sexual offences. 3 months ago, the CPS said there was insufficient evidence to prosecute Sir Cliff, but 2 alleged victims had asked for that decision to be reviewed. Sir Cliff said he was pleased by today's outcome. The first imports of US shale gas have arrived in British waters as debate here continues over the future of fracking. The gas will be brought by tanker into the plant of Grangemouth. Its owner said today the gas will secure many jobs at the plant, but environmental groups and some politicians have criticised the shipments. Now, the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, says he still wants to make the case to change the party's official policy on nuclear weapons. The current proposal is to back the renewal of Trident, Britain's nuclear weapons system. But Mr Corbyn said there were many in the party who had moral objections to the policy. He went on to criticise British airstrikes against so-called Islamic State in Syria, saying that the policy, in his view, was not working. He was speaking to our political editor, Laura Kuensberg.
It's hard. Whether it's kissing babies or playing the bongos. If you want to be Prime Minister, photo opportunities, well, they come with the job.
In harmony!
But it can take a bit of getting used to. So is Jeremy Corbyn really ready?
You've given me a line for tomorrow.
Is Jeremy Corbyn our next Prime Minister?
Well, I think we all hope so. It's up to him to show that he's of the calibre to win people's support.
Well, that's what we've got to be campaigning for, but that is also what he has got to show.
But he wants to show he'd like to change the party's plan. Labour backs nuclear weapons. He does not.
Well, anyone's entitled to raise an opinion on it, and they will. In the future, I'm sure there are many people that are going to become increasingly concerned.
The party's made its democratic decision. Do you accept that that is the party policy? Because it sounds like you don't.
Of course I know what the party policy is, and of course I understand the decision that was taken. Does it mean there are people in the party who have a moral objection to nuclear weapons? Yes, there are.
You sound very determined to bring this issue back to the party.
I want to see a nuclear-free world. I want us to make up our case for that and our participation in that.
Given that it is, though, currently the party's policy, despite some attempts to overturn it, do you still stand by what you told us last year, that if you were Prime Minister, you would never use the deterrent?
I never want to use a nuclear weapon.
Let's talk about some other issues. The UK is bombing so-called IS targets in Syria and Iraq. If you were in number 10, would you continue that?
I would be demanding as quickly as possible a reconvening of the Geneva process, as quickly as possible, getting Russia, America, Syria and the other parties around it.
Diplomats around the world are busting a gut to get talks to happen
Well,
again. But if you were
unfortunately-
Prime Minister, Jeremy Corbyn, would you continue UK bombing of so-called Islamic State targets in Iraq and Syria? Because that's happening right now.
And I'm not sure it's working. I'm not sure it's working. I think there has to be a political solution that brings together everybody with the exception of IS to isolate them, and that, I think, has to be the process.
You said this week you think there might be an early election, therefore hypothetically you might be Prime Minister. If you were Prime Minister soon, would you stop UK bombing of those so-called IS targets in Iraq and Syria or not?
As a Labour Prime Minister, I would bend every muscle I've got to bring about a political settlement and peace, and that would include the non-military options that are so important, because at the end of the day, every war ends by a political settlement. Let's start from it rather than end with it.
For millions of British voters, their decision to leave the European Union was around the issue of immigration. Would you, as Prime Minister, tighten the rules so that fewer EU citizens could come to the UK?
What matters to most Labour voters is actually underfunding of schools, underfunding of hospitals, insufficiency of housing, underfunding of local government, and lack of development and jobs in their communities.
But many people are worried, actually, also about the numbers, the way they've seen their communities change.
Well, communities do change, of course, and...
So what would you actually do about immigration if you were Prime Minister?
What I would do about immigration is try and bring about a degree of coterminosity, a degree of equality on work conditions and wages across Europe.
Do you think that the wider voting public now see you as a potential Prime Minister?
I'm here to lead this party. We are setting out our economic vision and alternative, an economic alternative that does provide decent wages. We have to deal with the stresses and inequalities in Britain. That's what Labour's going to do.
Jeremy Corbyn's promises have found favour with thousands of Labour members. But after a year of discord and distress in Labour, he knows the party has to change the tune.
Well, let's go live to Liverpool to the party conference tonight, and Laura's there for us. He talked to you there, Laura, about setting out a vision in different forms. What can we expect from the leader when he makes his speech tomorrow, then?
Well, Hugh, sometimes, as you know, with these big set-piece political events, they're sometimes notable for what's not in them as well as what is. Now, it's pretty clear there from Jeremy Corbyn's interview that he thinks the priority in terms of dealing with immigration is about wages and workers' rights rather than the overall levels. And there's already some eyebrows being raised here in Liverpool tonight because an aide to Jeremy Corbyn said Jeremy is not concerned about the numbers. And in his speech tomorrow, what will not be in it is any kind of plan to reduce immigration, despite the concerns articulated by many voters in the EU referendum. He will instead give a broad restatement of his ambitions, and there will be a call to end what he'll describe as the trench warfare of recent months. But, you know, before he gets to his feet on the platform tomorrow, there was a very big moment here at the Labour conference this afternoon when the deputy leader, Tom Watson, delivered a very stern warning to the party leadership and to his supporters, saying they had to stop trashing the record of Tony Blair and Gordon Brown, saying simply Labour wouldn't win if they somehow decried everything that they had done in the past. Now, that's important because there was real tension in the hall between the two wings of the party. Important because Tom Watson has his own mandate. He was elected by party members just like Jeremy Corbyn. And it's important too because it's a sign that even those who have stayed inside the tent, not quit, not resigned, not walked away from Jeremy Corbyn, will not be silenced under Jeremy Corbyn Mark II.
Laura, we'll talk again tomorrow, but for now, thanks very much. Laura Kuenssberg there in Liverpool. Well, if Jeremy Corbyn is to succeed in his ambition to be Prime Minister, then Labour must win back support in areas that were once rock solid for the party. Oldham in Greater Manchester enjoyed a reputation for industrial prosperity well into the 20th century, but it's now facing some acute social and economic challenges. Oldham voted overwhelmingly for Brexit. Many former Labour supporters have switched allegiance to UKIP. So our special correspondent Alan Little has been there. He's been talking to people in Oldham.
The annual end of summer carnival has its roots in Oldham's days of industrial greatness. More than 300 cotton mills brought generations of immigrants from Asia. What has globalization done to this town? When the world bought cotton, Oldham thrived. But then the world started making cotton much more cheaply. Oldham's mills declined, then died. The tide of that global market had turned. This year, Oldham was named officially the most deprived town in England. This has always been a Labour fortress, but in the past decade, the UKIP vote here has risen from 3% to 23%. Should Labour be worried?
I always take all these threats very, very seriously. I do, my colleagues do, and my party does. So, we will not sleepwalk into a threat without taking it seriously. They were one agenda party, and that item is now finished. So, they need to reinvent themselves, and if this, we'll have to see how successful they are in reinventing themselves.
In the years when much of Britain was booming in the globalised economy, this is what was happening to Oldham and towns like it. This paper mill closed overnight in 2001. Its 500 workers suddenly, without warning, unemployed. There are still eerie reminders, frozen in time, of that last day of production.
It's as though the pro-Remain half of Britain failed to notice that in all this dereliction, a powerful anti-EU sentiment had been incubating for decades, and that sentiment found its voice at last in the in-out referendum in June. It was, in part at least, a revolt against globalisation, a revolt against open borders. But to what extent was it also a revolt by people who have always voted Labour against the Labour Party?
How about some strawberries?
Strawberries. English.
Marlene Nurse is a retired schoolteacher and had always voted Labour, until she went to a UKIP meeting out of curiosity.
It was an eye-opener. He was just speaking common sense. We haven't heard this before. We never hear this from the Labour Party or the Conservatives or anyone. This is what we want. And from then on we were committed.
So if I were a Labour MP or councillor here in Oldham, should I be scared?
I hope so.
Real votes in real elections are still falling Labour's way in Oldham, but UKIP has emerged from the referendum with renewed energy and momentum, challenging Labour's claim to be the authentic voice in its own heartlands. Alan Little, BBC News, Oldham.
Now, for the first time, a baby has been born using a new 3-person fertility technique. American doctors say that the baby boy has the key DNA from his mother and father, plus an element of genetic code from a donor. The process allows the baby to be free of a condition carried by the mother, and they say it could help other families with rare genetic conditions. Our medical correspondent, Fergus Walsh, has more details.
A world first in genetics and IVF, carried out by American doctors in Mexico, a country chosen because there are no laws there to prevent it. The baby's face has been blurred because his parents, from Jordan, want to remain anonymous. He's now 5 months old and is said to be healthy. This technique is aimed at preventing often fatal genetic diseases from being passed on. The nucleus of the mother was removed, leaving behind the faulty DNA in these structures known as mitochondria. It was put into a second woman's egg containing only healthy mitochondria. This was fertilized. The embryo had all the key genes from the parents, plus a tiny amount of DNA from the donor, which is now in every one of the baby boy's cells.
It's actually quite a significant moment. It's really the proof of a long process that was initiated in the UK in terms of public and parliamentary debate and a lot of the science, showing that you can apply these technologies and ultimately produce a healthy baby at the end.
3-person IVF is legal in the UK. It's just not been done yet. But this team in Newcastle is close to applying for a licence to use a slightly different technique to that in Mexico. Among those hoping to benefit are Victoria and Keith. Their daughter Jessica has a serious inherited genetic disorder. They would like treatment to ensure a second child would be healthy. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
On the 50th anniversary of his first radio broadcast for the BBC, Sir Terry Wogan has been remembered at a special service in Westminster Abbey. Sir Terry, who died in January at the age of 77, was described as the best, always the best, by broadcaster Chris Evans. Our correspondent David Sillito was there.
It's 2 minutes to 8 o'clock.
Today's an anniversary. 50 years of Wogan on the BBC.
And the years together with you have not only been a pleasure, but a privilege. Thank you for being my friend.
Could there have been a better day for friends, family and colleagues to honour and remember Sir Terry?
But this was also very much a day about the viewers, the listeners, the fans, the togs, Terry's old gals and geezers. Does it mean much to be here today for you?
Oh, it's a privilege, absolute privilege to be here.
Inside, there was music. A thank you from Katie Melua, a Wogan favourite.
It's so easy to break our heart.
And tributes. This from Chris Evans.
Terry Wogan wasn't the best. He is the best. And he will always be the best.
You'll hear someone say
And from Peter Gabriel, a very Wogan-style farewell. Sir Terry's Desert Island Disc.
that'll do, Terry. That'll do.
Special service at the Abbey today to remember Sir Terry Wogan. Well, Newsnight will be coming up on BBC Two. Here's Kirsty.
A footballing fall from grace. The New England manager Sam Allardyce is out of a job tonight after a significant error of judgment caught in a sting. We'll be discussing where this leaves the national side. Join me now on BBC Two, 11 o'clock in Scotland.
Newsnight with Kirsty here on BBC One. It's time for the news where you are. Have a good night.